And we're live. I forgot the countdown timer today. How's everyone doing? We'll give a few minutes for people to hop on. Today we're gonna do maybe a call-in show. I don't have too much time. Probably have like 50 minutes, not 15, 50, 50. But we're gonna have a guest soon, Tal Hagen. You all know Tal. Tal's gonna update us on the situation on the land. What's going on? A lot of turmoil now. I'm so not caught up just because I'm so swamped with everything I'm building out here, right, in Venice, California for the past few months. I won't get too much into that now, but a lot of good stuff happening on my end. But on the land, I mean, I heard that 5% of Israel's population showed up to a protest, a few 100,000 people. That's wild. That's some serious stuff. So Tal's going to hop on soon and talk more about it. In the meantime, just a little update about one of the projects we've been kind of talking about on Sulha for probably a year now, but it's been on the back burner. We're ready to take it off the back burner, put it on, I don't want to say high flame, but at least medium flame. We're getting the show on the road. It's the project 100 Voices, where we interview people living on the land. The whole idea is to have in-depth interviews with 100 people living on the land of all the different demographics, proportionate to their demographic makeup, right? So we'll have Jews and Palestinians, religious and secular, different socioeconomic groups, different age groups, different political affiliations, and learn from these interviews people's true fears, concerns, and aspirations. What do people really want? What are they really concerned about? It's not just an interview where you ask questions and accept the answers. We're going to try to dig deep and understand why somebody believes something the way they believe. Like, for example, often when somebody tells you their view, they're not getting to the surface layer. Someone would say, for me, it's very important that the land from the river to the sea remains whole, right? That's a view, but why is that important to them? Is it because of security? Is it religious ideology? Is there something else at play? By getting to the root cause of people's fears and their hopes and aspirations, then we can start to analyze the data, right? This is phase 2 interview. Then we analyze all the data we collect and propose a solution based on actually talking to the people. So the whole idea is to build and propose a solution to the conflict. This won't just be myself doing it. I'll be conducting a lot of the interviews, but I won't be the one analyzing the data and proposing a solution. It's going to be really a team of people, from average individuals like myself to people who are in the field of politics or mediation, right? So it's going to be a team of people that work on this. And it's meant to really be a solution that comes from the people and not from politicians. And through doing these interviews and talking about them on a weekly basis, hopefully whatever is proposed gains traction before it's even proposed, right? People are intrigued by these interviews and everything going on. So that's kind of the hope. That's what 100 Voices is. We're not married to the name 100 Voices. Some of us like it, others less so. So if anyone wants to propose a different name, we'd love to hear suggestions. Let's see, we got some comments. Zohar Anovici, great to see you, man. Great to see you too, brother. We'll do a call-in show every few weeks, so hope you could tune into the next one or call in. Just then saying hi, good to see you. Hidden in plain sight, good to see you too. I miss you all. Yo, check out this bottle. This is a new friend of mine. Her name is Lonnie. What's cool about this? It's a bottle for drinks, but it's also like a neck roller, right? So I want to tell you the name of it so y'all can find it on Instagram if you're interested. Very cool product. Hold on. Mobot Nation. So that's MOBOT Nation. Go give them a follow on Instagram. I don't know if they deliver worldwide, but if you're out in California or in the area, you should get one of these 2-for-1s, you know? And Sonny, good to see you too. MK Matt saying hello from Miami. Hello, MK Matt. Good to see you as well. I was actually meant to be in Miami at the end of March, but I think I'm going to cancel my trip just because I am too busy out here. And Sonny says, hope you're enjoying your month. Yes, for those who don't know, it's currently the month of Adar. That is the month of joy. So if there's any time to be happy or joyful, it's now. Interestingly, I was not born in the month of Adar, though. My parents just thought it was a cool name. So I appreciate their creativity. It almost destined me to be joyful. So thank you, parents. Thank you, Ima. Thank you, Abba. Yeah, the name of the bottle is Mobat. Right there, spelled like that. So the Instagram would be Mobat Nation. Great product. Yeah, I'll even toss their thing out. I know they're not an official sponsor. They're not an official sponsor. I'm just shouting at a friend. I guess it makes sense to only really shout out products that you genuinely use. So there you go. You know what? Let's shout out our patron visionary members as well. Trivium Energy, PTY Ltd, the Transforming Trauma podcast. Y'all should check out that podcast. We got Jordan Walter and the Caffeinated Community Conversations, which is this cool group that are facilitating conversations on controversial issues. I believe they're doing that in Georgia, but I might be mistaken. Cool. So Tal, we got word that Tal's going to join us in a few moments. As I've shared with you all, I've been extremely busy, more busy than what's honestly probably healthy, but I am taking good care of myself. I'm exercising every day. I'm taking walks on the beach. I'm not overly stressed, but it is a lot of hours and just endless moving parts. But I'm really making a great commitment to come on at least once a week and just, whether it's a call-in show like today or an interview, a debate, a discussion, I'm trying to do something. So if anyone has ideas, if anybody wants to come on the show or has a suggestion on who we should call on the show, reach out to me. You can find my info in the description. And also, we mentioned 100 Voices. If anybody wants to be one of the people interviewed, also please reach out. Your interview, they are recorded, but they are not made public. Some of them will be made public. Those that are not made public, the transcript will be made public, but it could remain anonymous. So your name doesn't necessarily need to be tied into it because, people do have genuine concerns speaking their minds on this topic. So just know you could do it without your name being publicized. So also you can find my contact information in the description. Reach out as soon as, if you're interested. Cool. Tal's joining us right now. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat if anybody else wants to join the stream. If anybody's wondering what this awesome background is, this is, we actually have this venue that we took in Venice, California. It's called Tower House. We're turning it into a social club. It's one of the businesses under the Grateful Giraffes community, which I've gotten into on past streams. I won't today. But yeah, we have our own little social club. I mean, unclear if we'll even succeed at this specific venture. Grateful Giraffes is going great. It's blowing up. We have 450 community members around the world. The venture of a physical location is a different nut to crack. We're pretty damn confident we have this under control. But again, it's a new business that I personally haven't been involved in. So there's no guarantee of success, but in the meantime, it's going great, and we're super excited about everything going on. And we have our own 2,400 foot venue with this awesome outdoor balcony that I could do live streams from. Like, look, when have I ever had such a cool backdrop? If only this was real, right? It's not real plants. Maybe that's the next upgrade. Yo, Tyler, you joining us, brother? Tal also works a lot. He said he just got home from work and needs a few minutes, so we will be patient. If anybody has a question they want to ask, then now would be the time, and we before Tal hops on. Insani says spoiler. What spoiler? What's the spoiler, Insani? You have me on the edge of my seat. Will I be staying in California? I will be in LA for most of 2023, but it's not my permanent home. Israel still very much is. My family is there. So many of my friends are there. My cat, Peach, fucking miss her. She's there. My nieces and nephews. So Israel still very much is my home. I guess Venice is becoming a second home to me. I do really enjoy it out here. We're building an awesome community. So yeah, it's fair to say my heart is in two places. I think ideally, in ideal situation, I will be in between both, right? I could see myself doing 6 to 8 months out of the year in Tel Aviv, and then the other months maybe out here and sprinkled other places of the world, right? I really love to see new places. I love traveling. So that is the ideal situation. But that requires some amount of, some level of financial freedom, as well as less commitment to the actual work I'm doing. So right now we're still an early stage startup. We just had Grateful Drafts, just had our 1 year anniversary. Our team is growing, but as all you know, well, I'm sure as many of you know, building a company is extremely difficult and takes a lot of work. And especially at the beginning, it's not like you don't have a massive team to do everything. So a lot of it falls on the founders. So it's not just about having financial freedom to be able to go wherever I'd like to. It's about actually being able to take that time off, and not neglecting certain important things the company needs. So that's kind of one of the main things holding me back from just being able to travel more. That I'm very much needed in the day-to-day operation here. And I'd say one of the hardest things about what we're doing, everything we're doing now, is that A, I'm away from family, and B, just I do miss doing these streams. I do miss facilitating dialogues. Like, that's definitely something missing. That's why I'm really making an effort to come on once a week. Alaram, good to see you here. Also, Justin, would you also like to hop on? I know you mentioned you'd like to come on the stream, so if you want, you're welcome to. Edley Dowie, good to see you, brother. So just saying, LA is great, but I do very much miss my family in Israel, family and friends in Israel. But just the stage of life. You gotta kind of go where the wind takes you. It's definitely I would say in all the phases of life I've ever been in, this is the one that excites. That I've never been so excited by everything going on. There's never been so much. Like it's potentially even the most challenging, just with just the sheer amount of things that we need to do. But it's also the most exciting. And I'd say that generally speaking, I'm in a very good place emotionally. Like I'm not the stress isn't getting to me. um, I understood it very well. There's kind of like an irony because we're building a health and wellness community and a health and wellness brand. And we noticed after the first few months that it's ironic because just building a company takes a toll on your mental health. So, you know, how can we build a health and wellness brand if we ourselves aren't healthy? So I made a commitment that to really work on maintaining good mental and physical health. So I've never been in better physical shape. For example, like I exercise every day. I'm doing more yoga and meditation than ever before. It's also not hard out here in LA. There's just so much different wellness modalities. There's breath work. There's sound healing. There's cacao ceremonies. LA is the place where really it's endless. So it's been relatively easy for me to take the time I need to maintain good mental and emotional health. Oh, just then. Hold on. We're going to bring Just N on. Is in stream with audio only. What does that mean? Why can't we see you? Can say something?
Hello. Can you hear me?
It shows that you're
You should see my
shows that you're
avatar.
on, but I don't see you.
Okay, hold on 1 second.
So I don't know what's going on. Can't hear you.
Can you hear me, Adar? Adar, can you hear me?
Having some technical difficulties. Oh, this has never happened. I've never quite seen this.
Can you hear me?
Let's see what just.
Hello,
No,
I'm speaking.
Can't hear you.
Okay.
Can't hear or see you. Yeah, let's try to disconnect and come back. Thanks for everyone still with us. This has been a slow start. I realize that. Edley Dowie, thanks for the support. Edley Dowie goes, I've preached, watched Sulha to all my Jewish customers. I hope they tuned in. Signed an American Palestinian son of a refugee. I appreciate that, Ed. Really do. Wide Shepherd, thank you. It's good to be back. The attempt is doing one stream a week with different people, different topics. Always open to ideas because I have very limited time to book people and organize these live streams. It's you know, I don't we don't always have these exciting debates like we used to have, but we're getting back to it. Actually, we did have a nice little streak the past month, right? There was 3 weeks in a row. I spoke to David, who is a Jew who on many issues agrees with anti-Semites. We had an interesting conversation. Then I had a conversation with Blake Flayton on is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism, which is also an interesting conversation. And then I had a convo with Claire Kaw on secular Quranism, right? So we had some interesting ones. Actually, that maybe be an interesting segment to kind of do a review of those conversations because they all had some very interesting and insightful takes. Yeah. Oh, I see we got Tal here. Tal.
Hey, how are you?
Wait, why? I can't
Can you
hear
hear
you
me?
either.
No, it's not good.
Wait, could you all hear Tal? Maybe it's an issue on my end.
I can hear you. I can.
Say something.
Hello.
Oh yeah, I could hear you.
There we go.
Oh, maybe I was able to hear Just N as well. Just the volume is low. So Just N, you could try coming back on as well. Tal, great to have you. I'm going to give you the floor. What's going on the land?
That's
What's
such a.
the
That's like asking like, what is the conflict about? Like, there's so many things going on at once. It's and there's a lot of things going on in Israel at the moment. We have with the judicial reform. We have with the raids in the West Bank, government changes, a lot of other things going on with America now. Depends on what you want to talk about. How much
Well,
have you followed?
I'll let you take it in any direction you want. I know there's massive protests. What are
Yeah,
people protesting?
I went to the protest on Saturday, the big one, as a more like a film. I went there to just cover it and just take photos. I've done that at a few protests. Not joining in, just kind of like observing it, just seeing what people are saying and talking about. A lot of people. It was very, very hard to move around right in the center of Tel Aviv, where it actually was happening next to the Ayalon and Hashalom in the Israeli towers. And it's against the judicial reform. Of course, with any type of protest, whether it be, so this protest is more centered around, now there's some controversy with this because I've had people who would identify as right wing who have said, no, this protest is also people on the right. It's not just left and center. I categorize the protests majority as center and left, but there are also right wing individuals who identify themselves as right wing also protesting the judicial reform. So I would say more the opposition government coalition that's protesting mainly at the moment, and different individuals who have previously supported Likud and other parties that are currently in power. So of course there is a general protest which is against the judicial reform in Israel. Essentially, there's a few different laws that are being pushed to go through, but the main one is that currently in the state of Israel, the way it is that when a new law wants to be passed, it has to go through the high courts of Israel. And the high court of Israel decides whether or not it goes against the precedents of Israeli law and our Declaration of Independence, because we don't have a constitution in this country. And so there's no framework to really work from. We're all working from previous laws, what we put into place. But mainly, if it goes against human rights, if it's not, there's no equality, different issues like that. So Bagatz, which is the high court, can dismiss the law. What they want to do is have it that even if the high court dismisses the law, then at a majority in the Knesset of 61, they can pass the law, which essentially means that they can pass any law they want. Doesn't matter what it is. If they wanted to pass a law that would state that Israel now annexes the entire West Bank and Gaza and everything else, they can do that. Like in terms of what they're able to do. Of course, different Knesset members have said that they would never hurt basic human rights, and they would never do something that would put minorities, women, LGBTQ at risk. But me personally, I never trust what a person has to say. If it's not in law, I don't trust it. And even when it's in law, it can be abused. But it's very dangerous, in my opinion, when any government, anyone in power can simply pass laws without there being any type of checks and balances. I find it incredibly dangerous, and that's why these protests are getting a lot of momentum slowly. At the protest, that was the main thing that was being talked about at the protest. Of course, there's a lot of different, I would say, side protests that kind of latch on. There's protests about generally the military occupation in the West Bank. There's about, having peace with the Palestinians and ending the conflict. And they're usually, so when you see all the Palestinian flags of the protests, they're actually condensed to one area. It's right opposite of the Kiryat, which is the Israeli headquarters, and a corner part of Sarona. They do protest there a lot. Usually once a week, you'll see them there. There's like a whole group there. I think they're called Eyes on the Occupation, I think they're called. I'm not exactly sure. I forgot what their name is, but they're there always, and they were also there during the protest. But that's where you'll see the condensed area of more anti-occupation, pro-Palestinian support that comes at these protests. It's usually designated for one little area, and then all the way up the road, there's specific groups that have their own agenda that are also on the road. But the vast majority of the protest is in general against the reform. And then there's also parts of the protest that are specifically against Netanyahu being in power. But the vast majority of the protest is against the reforms in general.
Awesome. Thank you, Todd. I want to bring Just Den on as well.
Yeah, of course.
We're having the same issue. It says you're only here with audio, but try to speak. Let's see if we hear you.
Good afternoon and good evening.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. What's up?
So I was gonna join Adar before Tal came, but I don't want to take away the focus from what Tal is talking about, the current protest that's going on right now within Israel.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's why I said I'll go silent while he talks about that and continues.
If you have any thoughts or commentary on it,
of course.
Sure. It's interesting because, as you guys know, I don't know if you know, but I'm a Palestinian who's also in California, but with home in Jerusalem and family as well. And it's interesting. You said that the Palestinian flags were in sort of designated areas. Why would they be in designated areas? Was it because of like maybe a particular group, or was it?
It's a particular group that
that
usually has it. At the end of the day, in terms of, there's a lot of different connotations with the Palestinian flag within Jewish Israeli society.
Yes.
And so I think a part of it also, like I was hearing different protesters, what they were saying when they were looking at the group as they were going by. And because I would say the current government in power has very much designated that the flags themselves have a only negative connotation. And if you showcase the flag in any way of support, it means you only support it in a very, very negative light. And it's nothing about, human rights or protecting individuals or self-determination. That's not what it's about. And so people don't want to be latched in with that and get the protests demonized in their general field. I see. Even if that's just how media is and how things are portrayed. But that's just my personal view and what I observed.
It kind of reminds me, a few years ago, there was a model that wore the Palestinian scarf around her neck. And she was on the cover of some major fashion magazine, and people went crazy, like that's a symbol of terrorism.
Yeah, it depends on the connotation. Israeli society has a very negative connotation.
Yeah, and it's in the West as well, because it's like, things, terminology, and I think we've talked about this in our Discord server. Terminology, symbols and stuff are appropriated, to mean like, things that they're not supposed to mean. That like now Palestinians have to say like, oh, our flag is a symbol of terrorism for these people, or wearing a scarf around your neck is a symbol of rock throwing, Palestinians that throw rocks at Israelis. But I figured it would be something like that.
Well, again, it depends on the content. For most, I've gone to different areas of the West Bank. I've also have Palestinian friends who I speak to too. But for the vast majority of Israeli Jews, the only time the Palestinian flag is brought up is in a negative light, when there's an attack that occurs, or when there's a war with Gaza or other countries. And for Palestinians, for example, I'm pretty sure that Gazans don't view the Israeli flag too lightly. Whenever you see the Israeli flag, Palestinians and a lot of different Arab-speaking countries, like people who live there, are have very, very negative connotation with the flag.
Absolutely.
Even if the person who's flying it, like me, for example, me being Israeli, I've had many times that even though I'm like very much supportive of Palestinian human rights and stuff like that, it doesn't matter. The second they see an Israeli flag or they see that I'm from Israel, there's a very specific connotation that they have with me. And so that's just generally how we label different individuals.
And I'll be honest with you, me too. When I walk into the airport or when I walk into a building and I see the Israeli flags, I know it's normal, but at the same time, it does strike a nerve. To be honest with you, it's a symbol of what this conflict, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. It means different things for different people depending on how they're looking at it. It's whatever you in your day-to-day life,
absolutely,
how you perceive it.
So let me ask you a question, Adar. I'm sorry, Adar. Am I strumbling? I don't want to.
No, go for it.
Because a lot of I'm in touch with Palestinians in the 48 as well as the West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem and the diaspora. I pretty much, my friends come from all over. And one thing that's going on within the Palestinian community within the 48 areas is that, are you doing enough to participate in this demonstration? Because of course you guys will be one of the biggest victims of this judicial reform. And there's two notions. There's one that these demonstrations are not about us. They're about, now that like center and leftist Israelis are under threat, they're now motivated to action. well, where have you guys been for the last, few decades where, and it's like, so in a sense, they're skeptical of any kind of movement. So do you think that had it not been for these, well, of course we know that these reforms are what caused the demonstrations, but what they're hearing, the Palestinians are hearing is that let's keep the Palestinian issue on the side, because if you bring it in, it's going to scare away people and we're not going to be able to fight these reforms. So it's kind of like, let's put you guys on the back burner. And that's dangerous for Palestinians because we're always put on the back burner.
So me personally, coming from a background of media, very much I grew up in very much the pro-Israel advocacy groups, and I've learned about media and how things are perceived. There is also the context of what type of support is okay. Is any support good support, or does it have to be under certain connotations? I think in Israel, this can be the judicial reform has actually brought up a lot more Israelis talking about. At the end of the day, I mean, it's better for Palestinians for this current government to be out of office, no matter what the reason is. The current government that's in place has, I mean, you've had ministers outright talk about being in support of attacks against Palestinians under protection of the IDF and other things that have occurred. And so even if the protests aren't focused on the Palestinian struggles, at the end of the day, the solution that they want, which is the current government to fall apart and for there to be new elections, is only a good thing for the Palestinians in the long run, because the current government very much will trample any Palestinian struggle or right to any degree. While Lapid in the last government was trying to make concessions and was trying to reach out to Abbas and was trying to do much more things than Netanyahu has done in years. And so I think sometimes you just got to take the support that you can get at certain points. I think at the end of the day, I think we always have to realize that humans are selfish and we can only care for so many people in general. Just like I'm not really caring about different conflicts and horrors that are happening around the world, because why? They don't affect me personally.
Yes.
If I had a family member that was in a country that was besieged by different wars or conflict, then I would probably be sending money and I'd be lobbying for my government to do something. But because it doesn't affect me personally, then there's much less motivation for me to help. Now, there's always the connotation about we're all people and that we should all help each other. But it's also about, I think there's a part of like pragmatism and being realistic about the current situation, how people think and how people are. And so, yes, while it would be better if the Palestinian flags could be jointly with the Israelis in this struggle, the end goal of the Israeli protest against the judicial reform is in their favor, because if this gets passed, it's going to be much worse for Palestinians.
But do you think it's legit to say that most of the Israelis that are protesting now want to go back to 2 years ago? They don't want to go, because for most Palestinians, even 2 years ago, like the difference that they see that this government is more oppressive, this government is a lot more anti them, but they're just doing the same thing that was done before, but at a much more accelerated rate. So it's like we need to take it further. And I feel that sometimes that this is the elephant in the room that like we don't want to talk about it, because if we go back to, say, a Lapid government, for example, most people will go home.
I think that is something that becomes concerning.
I'd like to chime in on this one.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean, most of the protests, the people protesting, and I think this is likely true for most protests, unless it's like animal rights protests, but generally speaking, people are protesting for their own rights. That's the majority. And then there's what you call allies, people who are supporting that cause. So the majority of the people protesting in Israel right now are protesting because they're scared of the direction of Israel. It's not because they're greatly concerned about what will happen to the Palestinians. That's probably a secondary concern or a third concern, but that's not the driving factor to the majority of the energy we're seeing right now. It's because many Israelis feel like Israel is going towards theocracy and moving away from democracy, and that's very concerning. The reason there's a lot more apathy towards the Palestinian cause, I'd say there's two main reasons. One, generally speaking, it's hard to get people motivated and rallied around a cause that isn't their own. And two, Israelis don't know what the solution is, so it's hard to know what they're actually rallying for. I remember this back years ago. There was, I think, the biggest animal rights protest in the world was in Israel, right? A pro-vegan protest, and people were upset. They were saying, "Look at all these Israelis. They care more about animals than they do about Palestinians." And I don't think that's true. I think what it is that there's a simple solution. They're just saying stop consuming animal products. When it comes to solving the Israel-Palestine conflict, when it comes to improving the conditions for Palestinians, people don't really understand what that looks like or what the next step is. You ask most Israelis what can be done about the conflict, and you don't get too much creativity, too much insight. So I think that is the primary reason why there's not a lot of energy around the occupation or just the pro-Palestine movement. And the third reason is that it's just heavily ridiculed and there's societal pressure against it. So those three things, I think, keep it to a relative minimum. We do have more people joining. Amy, I'm going to bring you on. Oh, Amy, are you on?
Yeah, it's weird if they don't have their.
I'm out.
If they're not with a video, you can't see them for some reason.
That's weird. That seems like a new setting.
I don't like it because it's weird. It's like you can't actually, like, for someone who's viewing the live stream, it looks like there's only 2 people.
Right. There's 4 people. Let's see if it's a settings thing. So, Amy, feel free to share. In the meantime, I'm going to see if there's something in the settings. And I see we have Chudalicious. Chudalicious, we'll get you on in a few.
Yeah, well, I just got back from one of the protests that were going on today. And I listened to some of your conversation. I've been going to the Haifa protest every week in a row for the past 6 weeks. I usually protest with the radical bloc, the ones who talk about the occupation or raise it as one of their flags. And I gotta say, I think regarding what was said earlier, it's true that this issue is being relegated to the side by a lot of protesters. There are a lot of people saying, "Oh no, you shouldn't talk about that here. It's unrelated. It will drive people away." And I think they have points to an extent. What I would argue, as someone who does put it as my top issue, is that it's fundamentally related to the issue at hand, and that the occupation and the need to maintain it and the desire by certain right-wing figures to further it is one of the main driving reasons of these judicial reforms. And I think it's important that it's mentioned as well, and it is being mentioned, despite what some protesters say or want to happen. Usually in the Haifa protest, at least, there is every week there's at least one speaker who is more left-aligned and mentions it. "Where were you in Hawara" has become one of the most commonly chanted chants in the protests. They shout it to the policemen who are policing the protests, but were nowhere to be seen during the pogrom that happened last week. And yeah, there's an issue of like, how do you get the Palestinian citizens of Israel to go join the protests? And there have also been other speakers at the Haifa protest, and that's usually one of the things they say. "Oh, if you really want us to come, you should talk about the issues that we care about as well, or not throw us to the side." And I feel like that's the sentiment, because like on paper, polls show Arabs have on average have a higher approval rating of the high courts than Jewish Israelis. And yeah, they would be the first victims of these reforms. But these protests are full of Israeli flags and overcompensating degree, I'd say. It's a bit over abundant, in my opinion. They are, in every protest at the end, they sing the Tikva. And while, I get that from like a center left perspective, right? If you want to make it seem like, oh, we're the patriots, so we are protecting our country, our laws, but it comes at the cost of excluding the minorities, the Arabs. And that's why it's also important that things like the radical bloc exist, where those issues are mentioned. And I do think we have reached a point where there is quite a bit of balance between the different factions that are protesting. We're protesting side by side. There has been minimal amounts of violence between the different groups protesting. I think it could be better, obviously, but I guess I understand why a lot of the Arabs don't come to the protests, but it's complicated.
Cool.
Hey, Tal, can I ask you a question? Because he mentioned something that was important, and maybe you could answer this.
Wait, just one sec, Justin.
Okay,
I'm going to
go ahead.
add a few more people to the stream.
Sure.
Of course, try to keep your...
Real quick, though, Trudalicious, we're going to bring you on. We have a few more people waiting to come in. Just please put an avatar on so the stream at least looks nice. So either have your video on or give yourself a profile picture.
Yeah, and just keeping the conversation respectful and calm, and everyone will have a turn to speak. And any diversion from that will result in a keep.
For sure. We'll bring Trudalicious on, and just then you can chime in. Cool?
Sure.
Yeah.
Hello?
Justin.
Hi.
Yeah, we can hear you. Justin.
Yeah?
Yeah. I think he said he wanted Trudalicious to say something first.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
we can hear him. We can hear him.
I think you're new to first time coming on. So what's going on?
Yeah. I don't know. I was just, you popped up in my recommended, so I just wanted to join, I guess.
Okay, cool.
What are you guys
Welcome.
talking about?
I like your mask. We're talking about Israel, Palestine, the situation currently with the protests in Israel, stuff like that. Yeah. Where are you tuning in from?
Like wait, like area or like what? Like
Yeah,
what I was watching before?
We want your zip code.
Oh, okay.
Give us the coordinates.
Blackgate, Minnesota.
Okay, cool. You got
Justin, you were saying?
Yeah. Amy said something. I wanted to ask your opinion about it because I want to kind of confirm something that I believe, and I don't want to be like say, hey, this is a conspiracy theorist, but like, for example, these judicial reforms. Do you think that the motivation behind these judicial reforms are specifically so that the people who are in power right now want an Israeli government that will be able to continue the occupation, to continue control over the West Bank, because maybe they feel that democratically this is something that's going to be harder to achieve in the future and to maintain in the future, so that this judicial reform will actually kind of give them a guarantee in the future to continue the system.
Well, I think in general, it's really hard to know people's motivations. Sometimes also when certain events happen, it's hard to know whether or not they're just using the event to benefit their situation or they constructed the event themselves. This is also usually the basis for a lot of conspiracies. The current mindset, at least with the Chada, you okay? The current thing with the government at the moment is that their motivation, they say, is that the high courts have way too much power and that they can essentially block any legislation that the majority of the people want. And what the majority of the people want is whoever is currently in government. And that they will protect human rights. Whether or not that's their actual motivation or not is hard to know at the end of the day, because I don't want to speak for them, and I also don't. Whatever they're going to say to the public is at the end of the day going to be from speechwriters, and it's going to be very, very, very like structured language. And so it's hard to know what their actual motivations are, but it will lead to a lot of things that they will like. For example, the judicial reform will allow Netanyahu to be rid of the different his current legal issues going against him. The ultra-Orthodox will be able to put forth legislation that benefits them, which has currently been constantly removed by the high courts because of inequality. Different things that have gone to the Supreme Court is different tax reductions or different benefits that yeshiva students would be getting, and the High Court has dismissed them, saying it's not equal, that only one portion of the population would get this and not the rest. And then regarding the more right-wing settlement bloc, I mean, it's perfect for them because they can essentially do whatever they want in the West Bank because there's nothing to stop them. There's no checks and balances. So whether or not their intention, I think that each of these groups knowingly or unknowingly are aware of the different types of benefits that they're going to get from moving this judicial reform. But it has been a very long-standing, like Levine, the one who has actually been pushing for this reform, has been doing it for many years. Like there's videos from like 4, 5, 6 years ago of him talking about these issues that he perceives with the current high courts having too much power. So it's not new. It didn't come out of nowhere. But I think that these different government blocks gain so much power by this being put forth that they want to support it. They want to be pushed through because it'll help them at the end of the day, whether that's a conspiracy or whether or not they simply benefit it from at the end of the day. That's really up to, I guess, like sources from within who can say what they know.
Cool. Guys, I got to hop off, but I'll leave you all to it. Jelker Supreme and Bape Main waiting to come on. Just give yourself a thumbnail and we'll get you on. Mossad, welcome to the chat. If you want, you could also hop on, make this, that'll sure make it an interesting one. So Tal,
I think Supreme has isn't that a photo that he has? That's a photo.
I don't know. That's like the OBS stock. We could give it to him or her.
Oh, hi. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I'm just gonna hop off, but Tal, you got it from here. Thank you, everybody.
Oh, wow.
Thank you, Adar. Nice to see you again. Hope we talk soon.
Hi.
Joining.
Hello.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot about this Israel thing.
There's a lot of Israel things.
There's a what?
There's a lot of Israel things at the moment.
Oh, really?
Which specifically? The reform?
Well, people keep talking about this West Bank or something. I use Empower personally. I don't know. Would you believe me if I told you my name was Hal Tagan?
Oh my goodness.
I think we'll that was interesting.
Yeah, very.
I think, to go back to what you said earlier and to address what Justin asked, I don't think there's like a conspiracy. I think it's really just a matter of motives. You mentioned the Haredim and the settlers. I think the third main interest group that really pushes these reforms is the hardline, like Netanyahu loyalists, who have because the Haredim and the hard right have been pushing for this reform for many years. I think the main reason is it's being advanced now as opposed to not having been advanced in the past 12 years of Netanyahu premiership is his trial and his other just issues with the like personal issues with the courts.
Yeah, no. Also, I think that probably also motivated him. But again, there's also a lot of things that happen from behind the scenes that we're also unaware of that can also motivate different groups to push suddenly for these reforms than beforehand. But it's not like Levine hasn't been trying to push this for years. It's not new. I think it was the perfect storm. That's what I would say. That you had much more prominent right-wing presenters like Smotrich and Ben Gvir coming up in the past few years. You had Netanyahu's trial, which also put a lot of pressure on him. And then you had different Haredi parties that had a lot more loyalty now to Netanyahu because of the different things that he promised them. And so altogether, it works out.
I was going to say, you can definitely say it's the perfect storm, but
yeah,
the fact that you have certain parties now part of the coalition and powerful in the government gave kind of Levine the green light that, hey, we can move forward. And it's interesting because you can see them actually moving kind of quick because I think personally, and this is just my opinion, that they do feel that they have a timeline because I think that the people's reaction may, in a next election cause, vote these people out of power. So I do feel that what we're seeing right now is accelerated movements because they're saying, okay, we have a window of opportunity. So let's do this. But what's scary for me is that most people with this type of ideologies and want to do these things politically, they get elected to power, and then they develop undemocratic ways to keep their power. And I think that, again, that might sound like conspiracy, but it's kind of the pattern in history. And I think Amy kind of maybe follows that kind of way of thinking, because I mean, we sound like we kind of see eye to eye about a lot of things. I've never met him, but I don't think I've ever agreed with somebody so much.
That's flattering. I think, well, it's, we've seen this happen in Poland, in Hungary, in Turkey to an extent, although the circumstances were different. Like, I think there are different lenses to view this from. I think there's definitely an attempt by like Likud conservatives and populists to have like an authoritarian power grab, again, similar to Orban. And it's not a secret that they have a timeline. I mean, they keep saying they want to push all of this reform to have it fully legislated before the end of this legislative session, which ends in a month or something. That's why they aren't having full normal negotiations with the opposition. They do want to just get this done as quick as possible. And I think, Tal, in regards to what you said, it's true Levin has supported this, but Netanyahu, there are like many speeches of his. I think the latest one being from like 2017, 2018, where he says, "I, for all my years as prime minister, have protected the courts, and I will continue to protect the courts." And the clips of him that are now being played at the protests, saying, "Strong democracy has to have an independent court and a judicial review system, and that's the only way to properly protect human rights." And he turned back on this. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it happened just after his trial. Obviously, there have been others that have been supporting it since before. And yeah, there's also the fact that this is the most right-wing government we've ever had. So maybe it's easier for him to push it now. But I think there has been a change from within his and his surroundings mindset in regards to this.
Mm-hmm. No, it's also, in general, I think that what the reform or what the discussion regarding the reform really should be about is about a constitution. Israel has survived since its existence in a type of limbo. It's never really defined anything. That's why we don't have a constitution, is because we couldn't agree on what the constitution will be, what type of country we're going to be. And the fact that we've, as a country, the Jewish state has never been able to actually define what it means to be a Jewish state and what it means to be a Jewish democracy has haunted us since the creation of the state of Israel. And it's something that is constantly in a battle between, I guess you could say, like the right and the left in Israel, about where do we put more power to the Jewish characteristics of the state of Israel, or the, I guess you could say, more secular, liberal showcase of the country. And that's something that I think is the whole reason why we get to this issue of the judicial reform, because a lot of the individuals who are against the judicial reform, their main issue with it is they say that it's very biased towards a left-wing approach. Forgetting the I looked through a lot of the different laws that the high courts dismissed. Some of them are, for example, there was they wanted to not allow anyone under the age of 21 to get pitzuim, to get money from those who were evicted during 2005 when we left Gaza. And the high courts dismissed that and said even those who are under 21 can get compensation. And that was something that essentially helped the right wing by allowing those who were harmed, which was the majority right-wing individuals, to get compensation for being evicted. And these different types of laws have always tried to help people from all around the political spectrum, religious, non-religious, right, left. But in general, there has been a lot more, I guess, left-wing or center legislation that has been passed than right wing. And so what really needs to happen in order to have, remove this supposed bias from the high courts is by having a constitution, which we can all look at and agree to. The fact that we don't have that leaves us all in limbo about what is the right way to go. And I think that's a big thing that has followed Israel. I mean, it also harmed us greatly in 1967 when we took control of the West Bank, the Golan, Sinai and Gaza is we never agreed on what to do with the West Bank. We just said, like there was actual inside the Knesset, they had agreed that they were going to annex the Golan Heights. They were going to annex East Jerusalem and parts of it, but the West Bank, they just kept it under military occupation because they didn't want to deal with the population that was there. Instead of coming to some type of consensus and getting to an agreement at that time, they just left it in limbo. And that has haunted us for years, that lack of consensus. And that has followed us throughout the creation of the State of Israel until now. I think it's something that, until we have a proper constitution, that's going to be something that's going to threaten us. That's my take. If you disagree, please say.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of the left-wing calls, or like center-left calls for negotiations, said, if we're doing this, if we're actually sitting down together as a wide majority to fix the system, let's once and for all properly set a constitution. And I think there's a lot of merit to that. I personally have a lot of doubts that it's possible at this point, and I think there are merits to a system that is more fluid, like the Israeli one. But yeah, I mean, I think even if there was a constitution and that the Supreme Court could properly point to and said we acted accordingly to our authority, I think there would have still been calls from the right wing, from the Haredim, saying, "Oh no, the courts are left wing. We need to overpower them," and things of that nature.
In general, there's always going to be opposition from different parts of the right and the left, the religious and non-religious, to any type of legislation. There's always going to be someone who's not happy, but by essentially having Israeli law being dictated by precedent and what we did in the past, it leaves us open to never being able to have like a proper set of rules and regulations.
But doesn't that give the government sort of a cover? Because if there's no written constitution, then in a sense, it leaves, it's in the interest of some people to be ambiguous, especially in regards to how to treat these territories, how to treat the populations in these territories, and what to actually do with these territories.
Oh yeah, it's always been in our interest to be ambiguous, because that's the thing, we don't really know what to do. Like in my opinion, the way that I've always seen it in terms of the history of the State of Israel and legislation, I think we'll also let Claire chime in after this. I'm curious what their thought is, but that because we're so ambiguous, because we don't want to set in stone, because the second we set in stone what type of state the State of Israel is, then we have to act on that. And so if we suddenly say that we're a secular state, then okay, now we have to give all the Palestinians there. We have to annex that territory and make them part of the population, or we completely separate the West Bank or Judea and Samaria and make a separate state. Or if you say now it's an entirely Jewish state, okay, what do you do with the population that isn't Jewish? And so no one really wants to go into this either extreme. I would say the vast majority of people don't really know what they want to do in this. I mean, for example, Ben Gvir's solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and this is a quote, this is like paraphrasing, this isn't like my interpretation of what he said. He said this, that he wants to revert back to pre-Oslo, to the occupation, the military occupation that was on Palestinians. He does not want there to be an independent Palestinian administration, as in the army would revert back to being in charge of Palestinians, and that's it. And we would annex the rest of the territory under Israeli sovereignty. That's his final solution, which is essentially apartheid. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. Like it's a full-on apartheid by doing that, because then there's no solution. There's no temporary occupation until we can find a peaceful solution. It's forever. That's what he said, and that's not a proper solution to anything. It just leads to more extremism.
I mean, in a way, it's kind of like the status quo, but without the Palestinian Authority. I mean, where Israel just directly, governs without a, Palestinian Authority there doing it.
Yeah.
Do you gentlemen think that representative democracy is the problem? I noticed that the Kohelet, which is the one proposing judicial reform, sorry, I pronounced it incorrectly. Is basically saying it still supports representative democracy, but that is what keeps it really unstable. I mean, isn't that the problem? That's why you've been having so many elections. You must be sick of them by now. I mean, do Israelis say, can we try something else that isn't liberal democracy? And obviously, liberal democracy is a problem as far as the religious Jews are concerned. They don't like it. That's why they won't join in, and they feel their existence is about opposing liberal democracy.
Do you guys want to say, or I'll reply?
I guess I can reply to the first thing, and is that I don't think any Israeli is sick of I don't think the majority of Israelis are sick of liberal democracy, or
Maybe
representative
not the Jews
democracy.
you know.
Okay, well, no, obviously, I mean, there are populations in this country who have generally rejected Israel as a secular, democratic, liberal state, and a Jewish state too. But I think, if you look at these reforms, I don't think they're a very unique turn into illiberalism.
Yeah.
So
I get the impression that the reason why the Arabs hate you so much is because you are a liberal democracy. I think, even though they don't say it, it's sort of like, you should be living under Sharia like the rest of us. Okay, it's a speculation on my part, but it's sort of like, well, in the Middle East, when in Rome do as the Romans do. When in the Middle East, you live under Sharia, and we don't like you being a liberal democracy because it's evidence of Western imperialism. Western imperialism is liberal democracy.
So I don't know if Justin or you all want to reply to this. In general, also with Arabs, they're not all Arabs are Muslim. Some are Christian. That's an ethnic group. It's not all that. And in general, also with the state of Israel, this is actually something voiced by a lot of I would say whatever the far right is, but much more religious Jews is also that Israel should be ruled as a theocracy in conjunction with how the Middle East is run. It's also one of the issues that the biggest issue with Israel being a liberal democracy is that you have a lot of different ethnic groups in one place that don't see eye to eye. And so having a liberal democracy becomes very, very complicated because not everyone wants to be on the same playing field. One of the reasons why a lot of European countries are able to be liberal democracies is because they're homogenic. There is no massive population there that rivals their ideologies and their way of life. In the Middle East, this is why democracies don't work in the Middle East. And it's not because they are against human rights, but it's because you have so many different ethnic groups that are placed in one place. Like, for example, just so you understand, in Lebanon, after, I think it's from 1937, they don't learn history about what happened to the country because there's so many different ethnic groups in Lebanon that if they try to come to a consensus about what the history of Lebanon is, they're going to be putting one side's narrative over the other. They also don't have they haven't done a census on the population in Lebanon as well, because they're afraid of what will happen if we see now that populations have changed, that suddenly one ethnic group has a much higher population than the other. And this is something that throughout the Middle East has been an issue. And it's also why when you had different European imperial groups come and divvy up the land with a ruler, why it made so much of an issue is because you were placing different ethnic groups under one banner, under one flag that they don't agree with. And so with the formation of the State of Israel, you had two really big groups now over the years that conjoined Jews, and then you had Arabs, and suddenly they're hand in hand in the exact same territory. Both of them want complete control over the area because they believe that if the other side is in control, they're going to rule over them and take control. And so they fight against one another. And that's a huge issue that Israel is faced with, trying to be a liberal democracy, but at the same time, trying to be forceful enough to ensure that the Jewish characteristics of the state exist. When you're talking about representative democracy, I don't really see an alternative to Israel because there is so many different groups in the state of Israel that you couldn't have, for example, Democrats and Republicans, because you have individuals who would be Republicans, but they would be Democrats in regard to economics. There are Haredi parties that agree a lot more with left-wing parties because of the economics of left-wing parties, because they're much more socialist in regard to how they want their communities to be. And that's a huge issue in Israel, where you have so many different groups. And so let's just say I vote for Netanyahu because I trust him as an individual to lead the country. That doesn't mean that I trust the Haredi parties or the Zionist religious parties, or if I go with, for example, with Ha'avodah, the Labor Party, and suddenly I don't agree with Meretz, but now I have to deal with Meretz in the government and other far left parties who I don't agree with either. And so that's the real issue with the representative democracy that we have with the coalition governments, where you don't even really vote in who you want into the government, because you vote in one party, but you're actually voting in 5, even if you don't agree with all of them.
I don't know if you know that there is a verse in the Quran that is actually Zionist. It says, it acknowledges the right of the children of Israel to reside in Israel, but as a mixed multitude, which I suppose it seems to me it's a one-state solution. If it's, and it suggests that it is civic nationalist. But obviously it's going to be difficult. I mean, I think, even if you get rid of all the Arabs, even for Jews, you would need a two-state solution, wouldn't you? Because many neighborhoods in Israel are kind of, that sort of sign saying, don't dress like that if you want to walk through our neighborhood, kind of thing. Is that right?
I mean, I'm not going to speak on regard to Islam because I've read the Quran, but I'm not well versed in it. I think that just like with the Torah, you can't simply read it and understand it. The same thing with the Quran. I think that you have to understand it much deeper. So I'm not going to comment on that. That's for an individual who is of the Muslim faith to do so. So that I'm not going to comment on. But with regard to Jews, I mean, we have tons of different interpretations of what Judaism is and how we're supposed to observe. I mean, even with Haredim, ultra-Orthodox, I live not far from Bnei Brak, which is a ultra-Orthodox area, but I can walk there with my fiance, and she can be in jeans, and there's not much of an issue. But there are other ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods in Israel where if we walk there, we would be stoned.
Really?
But the thing is, even though they're both considered ultra-Orthodox, they're very different in the belief systems, even within the communities. There's other Orthodox communities where they're considered ultra-Orthodox, and for Pesach Seder, they're known as Chabad. And for Pesach Seder, they have non-religious people come over for the Seder so they can be a part of the tradition of Passover. And so that's another issue. Is in even when you say Jews or Muslims, which Muslims or which Jews are you talking about? Because they have wildly different interpretations of these different books and other issues.
Yeah, I mean, I see you have a problem in that Jews and Muslims don't have a pope, but at least a Catholic Church, they have the pope, and his word is the final word on the matter. But maybe if you have the Sanhedrin become the Supreme Court, you might have some peace. I don't know.
Well, that's another one side. Well, that's another issue. Is the we have the rabbinical court in Israel. And a lot of people don't agree with that being in charge. For example, they essentially have a monopoly over weddings. They have a monopoly over kashrut, which is now getting lessened by other groups. And they essentially rule it with an iron fist. I mean, there's so many stories, for example, with corruption that eventually happens, where there are places that in order for them to get, just whoever doesn't know, in Judaism, you have the whole concept of things that are kosher, things that you're allowed to eat, things that you're not allowed to eat and drink. And in order for a restaurant to be able to serve someone who is religious and keeps kosher, they have to have a certificate. And the only one in Israel at the moment, as far as I'm aware, that's allowed to give that certificate is the Rabbanut. Now, the Rabbanut, they interpret the Torah through what we would consider an ultra-Orthodox lens. And so even if I'm not a religious individual, in order for my place to be kosher, even if I'm keeping the place kosher according to my interpretation of the law, even if everything is kosher in the store, even if I'm not open on Shabbat, if I don't have their plaque that says kosher, it's not a kosher store. But sometimes, for example, corruption happens where a place will get these certificates and they won't get checked if you pay more money. And so corruption happens. And so this is what happens when you put all of the power in one when you essentially allow for a monopoly like that. And so that's another issue. Even if you have the Senaduin, you would still have the same. I believe you would have the same issue of monopoly. I don't trust people and all the power is conjugated into one place ever. That's my opinion about that.
You know, in medieval Europe, they used to sell indulgences. The Pope would actually sell indulgences, where he would give you like a forgiveness, buy forgiveness of your sins. So it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that with how you can buy a kosher certificate for your restaurant, right?
Yeah, it's not supposed to be like that, but that's what happens when you have a monopoly.
Absolutely.
Yoav, do you want to say something? You've been here for a while.
Yeah.
Welcome, Yoav.
Thanks. On the democracy thing, I once read something interesting. Gideon Levy, he said Israel's been a democracy for maybe 6 months of its existence between some point in 1966 when Levi Eshkol lifted the military occupation of the 48 Palestinians until the West Bank was occupied.
Interesting.
Like I think most people don't know that the Palestinians from 48 till 66 they were under military rule. They could vote, but whether you could call it a democracy, I don't know. I don't really know the ins and outs of the definition of democracy. But yeah, go on.
It's actually interesting that you mentioned that because it's true, absolutely, that they were under military rule, and that's actually one of the examples used by one state supporters. They're saying, look, we ended the military rule of the Palestinians in the 48 territories and everything is fine. And therefore, if we did it to the West Bank, it shouldn't be a problem. So that's actually one of the examples they use to advocate their cause, by the way.
I mean, the difference being that if you were to end the military occupation on the Palestinians in the West Bank, they would be around half the population.
Yeah. Well, and this is why some people say West Bank only, and like leaving. You know, if you there's actually, I think it's the organization that what is his name? Raf, the one that gave the presentation on the Federation. What was his name?
Rafi.
Yes.
Yeah.
His organization in his Federation plan actually includes, but the one that he originally was with actually has a similar Federation plan, but they exclude the Gaza Strip for that purpose, for that reason, because that would overpopulate the Jewish population.
I think also that it is important to make a differentiation also between Arabs who are under martial law from 1948 to 1966 and the Palestinians of today in the West Bank, who are very much different generations. The Palestinians who have lived under Israeli military control from the vast majority of them at this point their entire lives. They know nothing different, and Israel is an enemy, a constant. It's not this new entity like in 1948 where suddenly there was a new ownership over the land. And so I think it's very, like back then, I think that it was much easier for them. Plus, they also were still on land that they had owned. They simply now were no longer under the occupation that this military control that they had in the 48 boundaries. But it's also very different types of restrictions that they were under of the current day Palestinians. Like lifting military, if you lifted the occupation from, I believe honestly that if you lifted the occupation currently, it would just lead to a civil war. Because even forget the between Palestinians and Israelis, and by Israelis I mean mainly Israeli Jews. It's also from within themselves. They're incredibly divided at the moment within their factions. There's no proper leadership of the Palestinians, and that's a huge issue also when it comes to Israel.
Yes.
Even if we had a leader, in my opinion, more like Lapid, who was much more open to having a conversation with the Palestinians, there's no one to speak to at the moment because Abbas does not have the legitimacy of the Palestinian people.
Yeah. And this, see, it seems to me like the solution is very clear, but getting to the solution is the problem. And the reason, while you have, like in general, I think most Israelis want to see the Palestinians kind of like go off and do their own thing, do their own state, control their own lives, etc. But the question is how to do it, because you have to see the big issue that wasn't mentioned is fear. That people want the change, people are advocating for the change, but the thing is that if we do this wrong, the consequences can be great. You know, and as an, you know, for someone who's an Israeli Jew, who might be, say, for example, liberal or leftist or even centered, I see what the problem is. The problem is the occupation. But the question is, if we end it and if we do it wrong, it's going to be detrimental to us, our existence. And I think that this is a bigger fear than any religious issue that, like, for example, what Claire mentioned, or any other thing, is that there is kind of like, we have no idea what can happen and the consequences can be so overwhelming and so detrimental. And that's why what I've been always saying is that there has to be two things. There has to be the short-term trust measure buildings, like economic, social, but at the same time, an end game, a light at the end of the tunnel. And unfortunately, this is where Oslo failed. Oslo, said, in 5 years, we're going to negotiate this, but at the same time, settlements went crazy. They went from, I think it was like 200,000 settlements at the beginning of Oslo, 200,000 settlers at the beginning of Oslo, up to like now what we have about 700, and this is just in the West Bank, not including the ones, well, actually, yeah, that does include the ones in East Jerusalem. So I think that these are the solutions, is because people are really scared to move forward, especially I see on the Israeli side from many of my Israeli friends. It's because it's that fear factor. And I think that it's determining the political behavior of Israel more than any religious aspect of it, for most Israelis, not the religious right.
But I'm not sure that even the Palestinians are the main issue when it comes to internal politics. So I'm not sure that religion isn't the main thing.
Okay, can I say something about the Israeli Arabs and even the Palestinians? Yeah. They're not ignorant of the fact that there are divides within Israeli society, and they like to take advantage of it. They actually enjoy the fact that there are deep political divides amongst Jews in Israel, and they support the protests because it's a game of divide and conquer. The Hezbollah and Nasrallah was openly gloating and smiling and laughing at the fact that Israel was deeply divided. Israelis are deeply divided along political lines, left and right. And he said, "Why should we fire missiles on them when they're going to destroy one another in a civil war?" So they're not innocent. They're not ignorant. They're not naive. They're very cunning. They play the long game. And they're counting on the fact that they're counting on the Jews destroying one another over religious and political divides.
So, do you view Hezbollah as a Palestinian organization?
No, they're an Iranian Shia organization.
They're a what?
Iranian Shia organization. The Hezbollah in Lebanon, get it straight, is not Palestinian. Iranian Shia militia.
Okay.
They're a mercenary, not even mercenaries. They're a branch of the Iranian military.
Okay.
But what's this got to do with the Palestinian citizens of Israel?
I'm saying that we shouldn't view the Palestinians as innocent victims. They plot to undermine Jews in Israel and our society and our identity. They want to promote a secular, a non-Jewish, international-like state, which the left also supports.
It depends on also what you're talking. So it's all. I believe it's important to not generalize about the population, because, for example, Justin is a Palestinian, but he doesn't he's not in this conspiracy. Just like there are conspiracies about the Jews are controlling the same thing. As in, you can say, for example, you could talk about different Palestinian militia groups or different factions like Hamas, or you can talk about Iranian-backed Shiites, as you said, like Hezbollah, but they're not. It's not a conglomerate. Just like Jews aren't a conglomerate, just like Israelis are very different.
I work with Arab Muslims in Haifa, and
again, it's not. Also, I work with.
They're very supportive of Israel as a Jewish state. Some Arab Israelis have no qualms with Israel being a Jewish state.
Yeah, and some do.
Right? But there are Arab leaders that are fundamentalists, that are sworn enemies of the Jews and of the Jewish state, and they cannot stomach a Jewish state. It's anathema to them.
And just like there are Jewish leaders who can't stomach Israel not being a theocracy, they want Israel to become not liberal at all. As in, there's different groups, of course. So there's There are people all over the political spectrum, just like there are Jews who are very much not religious at all, and they want Israel to be a secular democracy and have no Jewish characteristics. And there are Jews who want Israel to have no liberal secular. They want it to be a religious theocracy based on
right.
Torah.
I understand that the dividing
That's my
lines.
point. Is then I think it's better to concise your language to what groups you're talking about. You not just Palestinians believe, because Palestinians is it's a generic term. There's millions.
I'm talking about the sworn enemies amongst the Palestinians that do not want to coexist with a Jewish state. They want to undermine the Jews by any means necessary.
So those specific, yes, and I think that also this is something that I think that this can also take to another conversation point, is that just because a current event that's going on supports outsiders doesn't mean that they're involved. For example, half the are Arabs.
No,
in terms of the fact that like Hezbollah, my point is that like, for example, just because Hezbollah is looking at Israel, it's really good for Hezbollah strategically that Israel's tearing itself apart. Doesn't mean they're involved. It doesn't mean they're involved with it.
No, but there's a pan-Arab, I'm sorry to sound conspiratorial, but there is a pan-Arab desire to make the Jewish state to subdue the Jews in Israel and have it return to the caliphate and have it be under Islam for religious reasons. That's that's their desire. That's their fantasy. That's a pan-Arab objective and agenda.
I wouldn't even say it's really conspiracy. There are different groups, of course. We know.
Yeah, there's absolutely
Hamas. They're very open about their beliefs. There's no conspiracy.
And let me just the thing about Hezbollah, and this term is used a lot within Palestinian politics and especially by non-Palestinians and maybe Israelis in the West. I have friends that are living in Lebanese. They're living in refugee camps in Lebanon, and their views of Hezbollah are they don't see it as Hezbollah definitely is not fighting on behalf of the Palestinians. They're actually, internally in the Arab world, you do have a Shiism, Sunni schism, which, if you look at what's going on in Syria right now, you have the replacement of the Sunni population that, a lot of the refugees were actually Sunni, and a lot of Shias from Iran are coming and actually they're populating the areas in Syria, changing the demographics of Syria. And you even have instability going on in Jordan that's supported by Iran. So, when you're going to throw something out like the Hezbollah has never looked out for the interests of the Palestinian people.
Sure. I'm sure they see the Palestinians as an instrument of basically undermining Israel, regardless of the fact if they agree with one another. From what I heard from Shia Lebanese, is that in Lebanon, in certain districts where Shia and Sunni pray together or separately, there was a divide to the point where the Sunni were massacring the Shia for praying incorrectly, for holding their hands up incorrectly. So that, like you said, there are religious divides.
But what I'm saying is that, if you look at even before Hezbollah, they were part, the organization, I believe it's called Amal. Amal actually massacred Palestinians in the refugee camps. They were actually at war with the Palestinians.
Right.
And I don't subscribe to pan-Arabism. I'm a Palestinian.
Palestinians just get killed in general? Like just
there's an expression. There's an expression that the Arabs came up with, that the Muslim world came up with, is that it's basically like this. The enemy of my enemies is my friend, regardless of whether I agree with that.
There's another expression that says it's better to have a wise enemy than a foolish friend. Mm-hmm. And this is more important, because when we start aligning ourselves with foolish friends, with ideologies and simps, and it hurts us more than dealing with a wise enemy. That's another Arab expression, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, being a right-wing Israeli conservative, I don't trust the Arabs. Bottom line, I'll be very forward and upfront.
Well, of course, and I don't trust right-wing Israelis. So we have something in common.
We found common ground.
Exactly.
I see a pan-Arab objective to undermine
and it's interesting because I see a right-wing conspiracy trying to dominate the land, and even some parts. Like there was a settler, I wish I could remember his name, who said, "We'll compromise. We'll give you our promised land that's east of the River Jordan, and you can make a Palestinian state there." So we got nut cases on both sides, man. What are you talking about?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, the solution will be provided soon enough, and it's you could call me a nutcase or whatever you like. The world is on the verge; it's on the edge, and I believe in messianic prophecies, and we're on the edge of having that be fulfilled. So the solution will be God's solution.
If God
It
can
won't be a
manage the
political
situation
solution.
better,
It
then
won't be
good
this
luck.
The
wrangling. It
amount
won't
of
be
times I've heard
Alex
someone say the
Beachfrog.
end is coming,
Who's
I
on
swear to
levy
God, I will
providing
kill you.
solutions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, so basically, I'll leave you with this. I'm happy to have conversed with you. I understand your positions, and you're all going to be in for a rude awakening very soon. And good luck to you.
No problem.
That was nice.
That was nice.
I'm
Alex
happy.
talking about how the end is coming, yet he ignores the fact for decades and decades the world has been run by a satanic cabal that rapes and eats babies, kids, whatever.
Okay.
Wow,
Children.
nice.
This is a fun place.
Very. Wow.
Believe me if I said my name was Helltaken.
Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Who was that speaking? Was that one guy? I think that's the same guy that came in earlier.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Strange people on tonight.
So I wanted to ask, I thought Amy was a cool, had an interesting perspective when he said he was, but the interesting thing is he said, I'm from the radical. And I was like, okay, which radicals were you from? The left radical or the right radical? Because when you use that term these days, and I'm assuming it's the left, because when he first said I'm one of the radicals, I was like, that's when you say radical to me, that's who I think.
It's also like, it also depends on like who's defining as right. It's usually because most people don't define themselves as radical. Usually you're defined by the opposition as radical.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but when he spoke, I said, oh, okay, now I see where he's coming from. But I wanted to ask him, and I guess you can answer this. He just
left. I don't.
Yeah. I think he wrote in the chat. But
oh yeah.
One thing that we read about and hear about all the time is that the younger generation of Israelis are more right-wing than the older generation. So I'm interested to know that when you went out to the demonstrations, so we'll go back to the demonstrations, did you see that the demographics of those who were demonstrating were older people or were there young people? Was there a presence of young Israelis?
Like I saw a lot of older people. It wasn't just like younger. It was definitely there was a lot of older in 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. There were younger, but I would say the protest on Saturday was the majority older people, not like my age in their late 20s or like more 40, 50, which was it's an interesting thing to look at. But again, you that's just based on what I saw. I could have been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But yeah, it seems that there's all types of demographics that are at these protests. It's not just one type of demographic. There isn't as many religious Jews at the like I would say religious like visually, as in with kippas and stuff like that I noticed. Then again, it was on Saturday night, like just after Shabbat, it was out. So it's not exactly easy to get to Tel Aviv right after Shabbat. So it's hard to know about the demographics with that. But it was a more like secular, older population at the protest on Saturday in particular. I didn't go to any other of the protests, so I don't know.
I saw on Twitter someone with a sign. Also in גם בשומרון מאמינים בדמוקרטיה. Also in Samaria, we believe in.
So that was fun.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess even a few settlers came.
Yeah, there were also protests in different settlements. I think outside Gush Etzion there was also a protest and stuff like that. But it is a majority of what we in Israel would consider like more center left. But there is also, which is more surprising, coming from right. And I think that's actually why we're seeing less of Palestinian flags and more Palestinian slogans in the protest, because I think they're trying to reach out to also those sides of the in currently with intersectionality and politics today. It's like if you support one thing, you have to support everything else. If you're, for example, if you're in America with Republicans and Democrats, if you support gun reform, then you're a Democrat. Even if you are very much against abortion, it doesn't matter. Whatever you say first, that's the demographic that you're in. And people's beliefs are a lot more complex than that. And I think that at these protests, they don't want it to get to a point where it's generalized as only being a left-wing protest. And so they're trying to, I think, be more pleasing to right-wing. So right-wing individuals who do support the protests can feel like they have a place at them, but impossible to know.
Yeah, I mean, go on.
I was going to ask you, do you think that if these protests and these reforms weren't happening, that because in Discord we had a discussion about the Israeli response to what happened in Hawara. I'm sorry, Hawara. What happened in Hawara last week. I personally think that if it wasn't for these protests and these reforms, that I think the Israeli public wouldn't have responded. I think that there was a greater kind of outrage in the Israeli public of what happened.
No, it was pretty major, like in terms of the scale of it, but there have been like what price tag attacks, so to speak, where they go and they damage Palestinian property or throw rocks and
no, but I'm talking about from the Israeli reaction. No,
but I'm saying, as my point is that this is not the first time this has happened, and but definitely the protests have put a spotlight on it. But I've seen many videos of it happening in the past. This isn't the first time, but definitely the protests have given it a lot more attention. So as I say, it can be a good thing in terms of the Palestinians.
Because one thing that we did mention in our chat was that that like I noticed that in the United States the Black Lives Matter movement took a lot more. I mean, first of all, you had the killing of George Floyd, but it kind of mobilized not only the Black community but also the white community as well, and the other communities, Asians, Latinos. So could that, and I said that maybe could this kind of be that light that opens up? And I think the Trump years also did that as well. I think a lot of people felt threatened as well. Am I being too optimistic by saying that maybe this is the spark that's going to say, hey, people are dying, this is really getting out of hand?
I think we are at a turning point. I mean, it's been building up. Hopefully the best possible solution is that the current government and the opposition are able to come to. I mean, Herzog has put forth a 5-point plan, and there's different conversations going on probably behind the scenes. Hopefully, they're able to come to some type of agreement where the government can feel like they've done enough to put forth in the legislation, but at the same time not have more and more animosity towards them from the center and left. But it really depends because, for example, if the judicial reforms don't go through entirely, I think that the government will fall apart because especially Ben-Gvir and Smotrich won't be getting what they want, and they won't want to stay with the government because there's also been a lot of internal power struggles between the different groups, which has also set them off. Like a lot of people don't see the government surviving that long simply because, I mean, at the end of the day, it should be in most governments, if Netanyahu says one thing, that's how everyone should be falling in line in his own government. I mean, you can say whatever you want inside, but when you have ministers coming out against their own prime minister and saying something entirely different and threatening him, then, I mean, it's not a good look and it makes the government just look really weak when it can't even stay together. This was something also that the Lapid and Bennett's governments had an issue with, where they were being held together by a thread because there was a lot of antagonism against them from the right, but also even within the party, different promises weren't being kept and they fell apart. And so I think we're seeing the same thing happen with currently with the right-wing government. But definitely, depending on what happens with this legislation, will give us a good idea of what's going to happen with Israel. Hopefully the protests don't get worse. I mean, the question is if there, God forbid, is going to be a death, the question is who throws the first punch in terms of, is it going to be a protester that in the heat of the moment takes a rock or does something and harms an officer, like seriously harms them, or is going to be an officer that breaks the line essentially? And it doesn't matter. That's the thing. It has nothing to do with if Ben-Gvir puts new orders or if the protests decide we need to get violent. It can even be one really bad instance that gets photographed that can set everything off.
Or the right wing. Or a right-wing guy attacking the protesters.
It can be anything. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be some coordinated agenda by either the right or the left. It can be one person at the wrong time, a good photograph, and that's it. It'll set it off. It depends. Yeah, well, hopefully it hopefully
Yeah, and
the judicial reform.
and I think your analysis about that this is like the perfect storm was pretty accurate, because it brought all these elements together, and I don't want to belittle the big criminal here in this whole mess, Netanyahu, whose short-sightedness and selfishness for his political future as well as his legal situation has really like kind of led to this very reckless acts that he's been doing, and aligning with a lot of these people, and kind of like bringing this situation upon the state. But hey, politicians will be politicians.
At the end of the day, people want to stay in power.
Yeah. Anyways, I enjoyed the talk with you guys. Appreciate it. Always good to hear from you, Yoav and Tal, and
see you soon.
See you guys soon.
I think we'll end it here. I think it was
Yeah.
a really good conversation.
Yeah, great.
And hopefully everything goes well. Good night, everyone.
All right.
See you.
See you. Bye-bye.